July 15, 1944, a narrow lane cutting through the Normandy near Villers-Bocage, France. Technical Sergeant Frank Morrison crouched low in the commander's position of his M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, watching through binoculars as morning mist clung to the ancient hedgerows ahead. His crew had been in position since 3:30 in the morning, their 76mm gun trained on a gap between two earthen embankments where intelligence suggested German armour would appear. What Morrison and his crew from the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion didn't know was that they were about to demonstrate a tactical revolution that would fundamentally alter the psychology of armoured warfare in Western Europe. Their mission represented the culmination of a doctrinal evolution that transformed American tank destroyers from mobile defensive weapons into lethal ambush predators capable of stalking and destroying the Wehrmacht's most feared armoured vehicles. The psychological impact of these ambush tactics would prove as devastating as their physical effectiveness, forcing German Panther crews to abandon the aggressive tactics that had served them well against Soviet forces on the Eastern Front. The story of how American tank destroyer crews learned to turn the Norman hedgerows into killing fields begins not in the narrow lanes of France, but in the training grounds of the United States, where military planners struggled to develop doctrine for weapons that had never been tested in the type of warfare they would actually face. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. In early 1944, American tank destroyer doctrine reflected lessons learned from North African and Italian campaigns, where mobile defense against German armored thrusts had proven effective. The Tank Destroyer Command, established in 1941 under Brigadier General Andrew Bruce, had developed tactics based on concentrated firepower and rapid deployment to threatened sectors. Tank destroyers were conceived as specialized anti-tank weapons that would mass at breakthrough points to stop German armored spearheads. This doctrine assumed warfare would be conducted in relatively open terrain, where tank destroyers could utilize their superior mobility and range to engage German armor at distance. The M10 Wolverine, armed with a 3-inch gun, and the M18 Hellcat, mounting a 76mm high-velocity gun, were designed to outmaneuver German tanks while delivering devastating long-range fire. Both vehicles sacrificed armor protection for speed and firepower, reflecting the fundamental assumption that they would fight from positions of their own choosing. The Normandy shattered these assumptions completely. The ancient agricultural landscape of Normandy consisted of small fields enclosed by earthen embankments topped with centuries-old hedgerows of hawthorn, brambles, and oak trees. These natural barriers, some dating to Roman times, created a maze of tiny battlefields where visibility was measured in yards rather than miles. Tank destroyer crews trained for mobile warfare suddenly found themselves trapped in a landscape that negated every advantage their vehicles possessed. Lieutenant Colonel James Harper, commanding the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, documented the challenge in his after-action report filed on July 20th, 1944. The terrain prevents the type of mobile defense our doctrine emphasizes. Visibility is limited to one field at a time. German armor can approach to within 50 yards before detection. Our superior range means nothing when engagement ranges are determined by hedgerow placement rather than ballistic considerations. The first tank destroyer units to reach Normandy in June 1944 faced a brutal learning curve. The 801st Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M10 Wolverines, landed at Utah Beach on June 7th and was immediately attached to the 4th Infantry Division for the advance inland. Their initial encounters with German armour proved frustrating and costly. Captain Robert Lang's B Company attempted to employ standard tank destroyer tactics on June 9th near Saint-Aimé-Église. His 4 M10s took positions on high ground, overlooking what appeared to be ideal tank country. When German armour was reported advancing along a nearby road, Lang positioned his tank destroyers according to doctrine, creating interlocking fields of fire. The Germans never appeared where expected. Instead, a single Stug 3 assault gun emerged from a concealed position, barely 100 yards away, and destroyed 2 M10s before withdrawing through gaps in the hedgerows that American crews had not even detected. The fundamental problem was intelligence. Tank destroyer doctrine assumed accurate intelligence about enemy armor movements would allow commanders to position their forces advantageously. In the Bocage, German armor could move along concealed routes that did not appear on any map. Panzer crews familiar with the terrain possessed enormous advantages over American forces who were seeing this landscape for the first time. German defensive doctrine, developed by experienced commanders like SS Oberfuhrer Kurt Meyer of the 12th SS Panzer Division, maximized these terrain advantages. Meyer's tactical instructions, captured after the war, revealed systematic exploitation of Bocage characteristics. Position panzers and assault guns to cover approaches through hedgerow gaps. Use the embankments as natural breastworks. Fire from concealed positions, then withdraw through prepared routes before American artillery can respond. Force the Americans to attack through narrow lanes, where their numerical superiority means nothing. This doctrine proved devastatingly effective against both American armor and tank destroyers through the first month of the Normandy campaign. The 801st Tank Destroyer Battalion lost 22 M10s during June, most to close-range fire from German armor that had achieved surprise. American tank destroyer crews quickly realized that their training had not prepared them for this type of warfare. The tactical breakthrough came from junior officers and non-commissioned officers who began adapting to local conditions without waiting for doctrinal guidance from higher headquarters. First Lieutenant William Goodman of the 634th Tank Destroyer Battalion developed one of the first successful hedgerow ambush techniques during fighting near St. Vith in late June 1944. Goodman's innovation was deceptively simple but required extraordinary patience and discipline. Instead of positioning his M18 Hellcats on commanding terrain in traditional defensive positions, he concealed them within the hedgerows themselves, using gaps in the embankments created by farm gates or cattle paths. His tank destroyers would remain completely hidden until German armor passed within point-blank range, then fire into the vulnerable side or rear armor before withdrawing through predetermined escape routes. The first successful employment of this technique occurred on June 28, when Goodman's platoon ambushed a column of German armor near La Haye-du-Puits. 3 Panzer IVs and a Stug 3 were moving along a sunken road when Goodman's lead Hellcat fired from a concealed position barely 30 yards away. The high-velocity 76mm round penetrated the lead Panzer IV's side armor and detonated its ammunition. The second tank destroyer, positioned 200 yards further along the route, destroyed the Stuga 3 as the column attempted to reverse. Within 90 seconds, 4 German armoured vehicles were burning, and both Hellcats had withdrawn to secondary positions. The psychological impact on German crews was immediate and profound. Panzer commanders, who had grown accustomed to dominating the Bocage through superior armour and firepower, suddenly faced an enemy that could strike without warning from invisible positions. The knowledge that every hedgerow might conceal American tank destroyers fundamentally altered German tactical behaviour. Technical Sergeant Harold Baumgarten of the 773rd Tank Destroyer Battalion observed this change in German behaviour in his personal journal, preserved in the National Archives. Before we started using ambush tactics, German tanks moved confidently along roads and lanes. They would advance boldly, knowing their frontal armour could resist our guns at range. Now they creep forward cautiously, stopping frequently to scan for threats. They avoid roads whenever possible, moving cross-country even when it slows their advance. Fear has made them predictable. The development of systematic ambush doctrine required solving numerous technical and tactical problems. Tank destroyer crews needed to identify and prepare concealed firing positions while maintaining escape routes that German forces could not easily block. The Hellcat's thin armour, originally seen as a disadvantage, became an asset in ambush warfare, where concealment was more valuable than protection. Sergeant First Class Anthony Rubino, of the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, became one of the most successful practitioners of hedgerow ambush tactics. Between July 1st and August 15th, 1944, Rubino's M18 crew was credited with destroying 11 German armoured vehicles, including 4 Panthers, without suffering any casualties. His techniques, documented in training materials prepared in late 1944, became standard doctrine for tank destroyer units. Rubino's method emphasized reconnaissance and preparation. His crew would spend days identifying potential ambush sites, testing fields of fire, and establishing multiple escape routes. They would camouflage their Hellcats so thoroughly that German infantry patrols often passed within yards without detection. Most critically, they learned to resist the temptation to engage targets that were not perfectly positioned for ambush. The discipline required for successful ambush warfare cannot be overstated. Tank destroyer crews had to remain motionless for hours, sometimes days, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Many ambushes were abandoned when German armor appeared at ranges or angles that did not guarantee success. The difference between successful and unsuccessful ambush crews often came down to patience and the ability to let targets pass, rather than taking marginal shots that would reveal their positions. The M18 Hellcat proved ideally suited for hedgerow ambush warfare. Its high-velocity 76mm gun could penetrate the side armor of any German tank at close range. The vehicle's speed, capable of 55 miles per hour on roads, allowed rapid repositioning between ambush sites. Most importantly, the open-topped turret provided excellent visibility for detecting approaching targets and coordinating with infantry. Captain James Leach of the 634th Tank Destroyer Battalion explained the Hellcat's advantages in a letter to his wife, written in August 1944. The Hellcat is perfect for this type of fighting. We can hide it completely in the hedgerows where German crews cannot see us until we fire. The gun will punch through any German tank's side armor at these ranges. When we shoot, we kill. Then we disappear before they can respond. It is like hunting, except the deer can shoot back. The coordination between tank destroyer crews and infantry was crucial for successful ambush operations. Infantry provided security for tank destroyer positions and early warning of approaching German forces. Tank destroyers provided devastating firepower that could destroy German armor too heavily protected for infantry anti-tank weapons to penetrate. This cooperation evolved naturally at the platoon and company level, as both tank destroyer crews and infantry learned to exploit each other's capabilities. Sergeant Robert Kellerman of the 2nd Infantry Division described this cooperation in an oral history recorded in 1987. The tank destroyer boys would set up their Hellcats in positions we showed them. We knew every path through the hedgerows, every place where German tanks could move. When we spotted German armor approaching, we would signal the tank destroyers with hand signals or field phones. They would wait until the Germans were perfectly positioned, then open fire. After they shot, we would provide covering fire while they withdrew to their next position. The first major test of systematic hedgerow ambush doctrine came during Operation Cobra, the American breakout offensive that began on July 25, 1944. Tank destroyer battalions were assigned specific sectors to defend against German counterattacks, while American armor advanced through gaps created by massive aerial bombardment. The 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, positioned to cover the eastern flank of the breakthrough, faced elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, attempting to seal the gap. The German counterattack began on July 26, with approximately 40 tanks and assault guns advancing along multiple routes toward American positions near Saint-Gilles. SS Oberfuhrer Wilhelm Bittrich, commanding the 2nd SS Panzer Division, employed standard German armored tactics, concentrating his forces for a powerful thrust designed to overwhelm American defensive positions through shock and firepower. Technical Sergeant Frank Morrison's platoon from C Company, 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, had prepared ambush positions along the primary German approach route. 3 M18 Hellcats were concealed in hedgerow positions, with overlapping fields of fire covering a sunken road that intelligence suggested German armor would use. Morrison's crew occupied the central position with the best field of fire across the killing zone. At approximately 1400 hours on July 26th, Morrison spotted the lead elements of the German column through his binoculars. 5 Panzer IVs, followed by 3 Panthers, were advancing in column formation along the sunken road. The German tanks moved cautiously, scanning for threats, but their visibility was limited by the high embankments that bordered the route. Morrison waited until the lead Panzer IV was barely 40 yards away before giving his gunner permission to fire. The 76mm round struck the German tank's side armor and penetrated into the fighting compartment, killing the crew instantly. The second Hellcat, positioned 150 yards further along the route, fired simultaneously at the second Panzer IV with similar results. Within seconds, 2 German tanks were burning and blocking the narrow road. The German column's response demonstrated the psychological impact of effective ambush tactics. Instead of attempting to suppress the American positions with return fire, the surviving tanks immediately began reversing, seeking to escape the killing zone as quickly as possible. The lead Panther, attempting to back up rapidly, threw a track and became immobilized. Morrison's gunner fired again, this time targeting the disabled Panther's rear armor. The tungsten core round penetrated easily, detonating the ammunition and destroying the tank in a massive explosion. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. 4 German tanks were destroyed, and the survivors had withdrawn beyond effective range. Morrison's platoon suffered no casualties and was able to reposition to secondary ambush sites before German artillery could respond. The psychological effect on the remaining German forces was evident in their subsequent behavior. The planned armored thrust degenerated into cautious probing as German commanders lost confidence in their ability to advance through terrain where every hedgerow might conceal American tank destroyers. This pattern repeated across the entire front during Operation Cobra. German armored counterattacks that should have been delivered with speed and aggression instead became hesitant advances that were easily repelled by American forces. Tank destroyer ambush tactics had fundamentally altered the tactical balance, forcing German armor into defensive postures that negated their advantages in individual tank performance. The impact of successful ambush operations extended beyond immediate tactical results. German intelligence officers analyzing destroyed vehicles found penetration patterns that indicated close-range engagement from concealed positions. The realization that American forces had developed systematic ambush doctrine using specialized vehicles forced major changes in German operational planning. Oberst Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the Panzer Lehr Division, documented German concerns in reports captured after the war. American tank destroyers have adopted tactics that negate our advantages in armor protection and gun range. They strike from concealed positions at ranges where our return fire is impossible. Our crews report that every advance through hedgerow country requires extreme caution. The psychological effect on crew morale is significant. Tank commanders who previously advanced confidently now proceed with extreme caution. The development of countermeasures against American ambush tactics became a German priority, but solutions proved elusive. German forces lacked the infantry strength necessary for thorough reconnaissance of hedgerow positions. Air superiority belonged completely to Allied forces, preventing German aerial reconnaissance of American tank destroyer positions. Most critically, the bocage terrain that favored American ambush tactics could not be altered by German engineering efforts. German attempts to develop systematic countermeasures were hampered by the mobility of American tank destroyer units. Unlike fixed defensive positions that could be mapped and avoided, tank destroyer ambush sites changed constantly. American crews would occupy a position for a single engagement, then move to an entirely different sector. German intelligence could never develop accurate pictures of American defensive dispositions. The Battle of Mortain, in early August 1944, provided the ultimate test of American tank destroyer ambush doctrine against a major German armored offensive. Operation Lüttich, Hitler's attempt to cut off American forces that had broken through at Avranches, committed the strongest German armored forces available in Normandy to a desperate offensive aimed at reaching the coast. The attack began on August 7th, with elements of 4 panzer divisions advancing westward through terrain, ideally suited for tank destroyer ambush operations. American tank destroyer battalions, positioned to cover key approaches, faced the largest concentration of German armor since the opening of the Normandy campaign. The 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, reinforced with additional M18 Hellcats, defended the northern approaches to Mortain, where intelligence indicated the main German thrust would develop. The German offensive initially achieved tactical surprise, advancing several miles before encountering organized American resistance. However, As German armour entered the hedgerow country around Mortain, they encountered the systematic ambush defences that American tank destroyer crews had perfected over 6 weeks of combat. The results were devastating for German forces and marked the decisive failure of their last major offensive in Normandy. Tank destroyer ambush. Tactics had evolved from desperate improvisations by junior officers into systematic doctrine that fundamentally altered the tactical balance of armoured warfare in Western Europe. American crews had learned to turn the Normandy-Bocage from an obstacle into a weapon, using terrain that initially favoured German defensive operations to create killing fields where superior German armour could be destroyed by inferior but better positioned American vehicles. The psychological transformation was as significant as the tactical evolution. Tank destroyer crews who had initially felt outmatched by German armour learned through experience that proper positioning and patience could overcome technical disadvantages. German crews who had dominated European battlefields for 3 years discovered that their advantages in armour protection and firepower meant nothing when American tank destroyers could strike from invisible positions at point-blank range. The German offensive at Mortain provided the ultimate validation of American tank destroyer ambush doctrine under the most challenging circumstances. By August 7, 1944, German forces had concentrated 4 panzer divisions for Operation Lüttich, Hitler's desperate attempt to sever American supply lines by driving through Mortain to the coast at Avranches. The attacking force included elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte, the 2nd Panzer Division, the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, and the 116th Panzer Division, representing the strongest German armoured concentration assembled since the opening of the Normandy campaign. German planning for Lüttich assumed that concentrated armour could achieve breakthrough against American defensive positions through shock and overwhelming firepower. The attack would advance along multiple routes through terrain that German commanders recognized favored defensive operations, but they believed superior German armour could overcome these disadvantages through aggressive tactics and numerical concentration at the point of attack. American defensive preparations reflected 6 weeks of experience with hedgerow ambush warfare. Tank destroyer battalions had identified key terrain features along probable German approach routes and established multiple ambush sites with predetermined fields of fire and escape routes. The 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, now reinforced to 6 companies with additional M18 Hellcats, held responsibility for defending the northern approaches, where intelligence indicated the main German effort would develop. Technical Sergeant Morrison's C Company had prepared 3 separate ambush positions along the road from Saudeval to Mortain, each site offering concealed firing positions and covered withdrawal routes. Morrison's personal experience with hedgerow ambush tactics had taught him that German armour advancing at night or in poor visibility was particularly vulnerable to close-range surprise attacks. The German offensive began at approximately 0200 hours on August 7th, with advance elements probing American positions. The main attack developed at dawn when German armour began advancing along multiple routes toward Mortain. Morrison's first contact came at 0615, when his forward observation post reported German tanks approaching from the northeast. Through his binoculars, Morrison could identify at least 8 German tanks, including several Panthers, advancing in column formation along the sunken road his crew had been watching for 3 days. The German tanks moved with the confidence characteristic of forces that had achieved tactical surprise, their crews apparently unaware that American tank destroyers were positioned to ambush them. Morrison waited until the lead Panther was less than 50 yards from his concealed position before ordering his gunner to fire. The 76mm high-velocity round struck the Panther's side armour and penetrated into the fighting compartment. The secondary explosion as stored ammunition detonated, lifted the Panther's turret from its ring and blocked the narrow road with burning wreckage. The second M18 in Morrison's platoon, positioned 200 yards further along the German route, fired immediately at the second tank in the column. The round penetrated the side armour of a Panzer IV and ignited its fuel, creating a second burning obstacle. Within 90 seconds, the German column was trapped between 2 wrecks, with additional American tank destroyers positioned to engage any vehicle that attempted to bypass the roadblock. The German response demonstrated how fundamentally ambush tactics had altered the psychology of armored warfare. Instead of attempting to suppress American positions with return fire, the surviving German tanks immediately began reversing, seeking escape routes through terrain they had not properly reconnoitred. 2 more Panthers were destroyed attempting to maneuver cross-country through fields where their weight caused them to bog down in soft ground. Morrison's platoon withdrew to secondary positions before German artillery could respond, having destroyed 4 German tanks without suffering any casualties. This pattern repeated across the entire Mortain sector as American tank destroyer crews demonstrated their mastery of ambush warfare against the strongest German armoured force they had yet faced. The Battle of Mortain continued through August 12th, with German forces making repeated attempts to break through American defensive positions. Each attack followed similar patterns, with German armour advancing confidently until encountering American ambush positions, then withdrawing after suffering heavy casualties without achieving significant territorial gains. The cumulative effect was devastating for German armoured strength and morale. Major General Elwood Quesada's 9 Tactical Air Command provided crucial support for American tank destroyer operations once weather cleared on August 8th. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs flying close air support missions could coordinate directly with tank destroyer crews through forward air controllers. When German armour was spotted approaching American positions, airstrikes would fix the enemy in place while tank destroyers manoeuvred to optimal ambush positions. The coordination between air power and tank destroyer ambush tactics created a synergistic effect that German forces could not counter. German armour caught in American ambush positions could not withdraw quickly enough to escape air attack, while German forces attempting to avoid airstrikes by remaining concealed became vulnerable to tank destroyer crews who knew the terrain intimately. Staff Sergeant Donald Tiger of the 634th Tank Destroyer Battalion described this cooperation in a letter written on August 10th. "The fighter boys spot German tanks for us and keep them pinned down with strafing runs. We move into ambush positions while the Germans are taking cover. When the aircraft pull off, we open fire before the German crews can react. It is like having eyes in the sky that work directly for us." The ammunition employed by American tank destroyer crews during the Mortain fighting demonstrated significant improvements over standard anti-tank rounds available earlier in the campaign. By August 1944, many M18 Hellcats were equipped with M93 high-velocity armor-piercing rounds containing tungsten carbide cores that dramatically increased penetrating power against German armor. The M93 round, fired from the M176mm gun, achieved muzzle velocities of over 1,000 meters per second compared to approximately 800 meters per second for standard M62 armor-piercing rounds. At the close ranges characteristic of hedgerow ambush warfare, these high-velocity rounds could penetrate the side armor of any German tank, including the heaviest Tigers. Technical Sergeant Morrison's crew fired their first M93 rounds during the Mortain fighting and immediately noted the improved effectiveness. Morrison's gunner, Corporal James Walsh, recorded his impressions in a diary preserved by his family. "The new tungsten rounds punch through Panther armor like it was paper. At these close ranges, we can penetrate anywhere we hit them. The psychological effect on German crews must be terrible when they realize their best armor cannot protect them." The tactical employment of specialized ammunition required careful planning and discipline. Tank destroyer crews received limited quantities of M93 rounds and were instructed to reserve them for engagement with heavy German armor when standard ammunition might prove inadequate. This created additional pressure on crew commanders who had to make instantaneous decisions about which ammunition type to employ under combat conditions. Sergeant First Class Anthony Rubino, whose M18 crew had become legendary for their ambush successes, developed techniques for maximizing the effectiveness of specialized ammunition. Rubino's crew would conduct detailed reconnaissance of potential ambush sites, identifying positions that offered optimal shot angles against the vulnerable areas of German tanks. They would pre-position different ammunition types for quick access and brief all crew members on engagement priorities. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Battle of Mortain's conclusion, on August 12th, marked a decisive shift in the psychological balance of the Normandy campaign. German armoured forces that had advanced confidently at the beginning of Operation Lüttich were now reduced to remnants attempting desperate breakout attacks to avoid encirclement. American tank destroyer ambush tactics had proven capable of stopping the strongest German armoured offensive while inflicting casualties that German forces could not sustain. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach, commanding the 5th Panzer Army during Mortain, documented German frustrations in reports captured after the war. American tank destroyers have mastered the art of ambush warfare in this terrain. Our crews report that every advance through hedgerow country is met by devastating fire from concealed positions. The psychological effect on tank commanders is severe. Units that previously attacked aggressively now advance with extreme caution, reducing their effectiveness significantly. The success of tank destroyer ambush tactics at Mortain led to immediate doctrinal changes throughout American armoured forces. Tank destroyer battalions received increased allocations of specialized ammunition and additional training in hedgerow warfare. More importantly, the psychological confidence gained from repeatedly defeating German armour in direct combat transformed American tank destroyer crews from defensive fighters into aggressive hunters. Technical innovations developed during the Normandy campaign improved tank destroyer effectiveness beyond the immediate tactical level. American ordnance officers studying combat reports from hedgerow fighting developed improved camouflage techniques specifically designed for concealing tank destroyers in agricultural terrain. These techniques, incorporating local vegetation and artificial materials, allowed M18 crews to remain undetected even when German infantry patrols passed within yards of their positions. The development of communication procedures between tank destroyer crews and supporting infantry proved crucial for sustained ambush operations. Tank destroyer commanders learned to coordinate closely with infantry squad leaders, who provided early warning of approaching German forces and security for tank destroyer positions during extended ambushes. Infantry squads learned to identify optimal tank destroyer positioning and assist with camouflage and concealment. Corporal William Hayes of the 29th Infantry Division described this cooperation in an oral history recorded in 1985. The tank destroyer boys were artists at hiding their Hellcats. We would help them cut branches and position camouflage nets. When German tanks approached, we would signal with hand signals or field telephone. After they fired, we would provide covering fire while they moved to their next position. It became second nature after a few weeks. The psychological impact of successful ambush operations extended far beyond immediate tactical results. German tank commanders who survived encounters with American tank destroyer ambushes carried knowledge of American capabilities back to their units, spreading awareness that even the strongest German armor was vulnerable to American fire under certain circumstances. This knowledge fundamentally altered German tactical behavior. Panzer crews, who had previously advanced boldly along roads and obvious routes, now conducted extensive reconnaissance before any movement. German armoured formations began requiring infantry and engineer support for advances through terrain that might conceal American tank destroyers. These precautionary measures slowed German operational tempo and reduced the aggressive tactics that had characterized German armoured operations earlier in the war. The training implications of hedgerow ambush warfare influenced American tank destroyer doctrine for the remainder of the European campaign. Tank destroyer battalions established specialized schools where experienced crews taught ambush techniques to newly arrived units. These schools emphasized patience, camouflage, shot placement, and rapid withdrawal procedures that had proven effective in combat. Master Sergeant Frank Morrison, promoted after his performance at Mortain, became one of the primary instructors at the Tank Destroyer Training Centre established near Cerisy-la-Forêt in September 1944. Morrison's curriculum emphasized the psychological aspects of ambush warfare as much as technical procedures. Students learned that successful ambush required mental discipline to wait for optimal targets, rather than engaging marginal opportunities that might compromise their positions. The expansion of ambush tactics beyond the Bocage demonstrated their broader applicability to different terrain conditions. As American forces advanced into the Lorraine region in September 1944, tank destroyer crews adapted hedgerow ambush techniques to the rolling agricultural terrain of eastern France. The principles remained constant even when specific terrain features differed. Lieutenant Colonel James Harper, commanding the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, documented this adaptation in his unit history. The basic elements of successful ambush warfare apply regardless of specific terrain characteristics. Concealment, patience, coordination with supporting arms, and rapid withdrawal after engagement are universal requirements. Our crews learned to read any terrain for ambush opportunities and exploit natural features for concealment and fields of fire. The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 provided another demonstration of tank destroyer ambush effectiveness against German armour operating in more open terrain. The 634th Tank Destroyer Battalion, supporting Combat Command A of the 4th Armoured Division, employed ambush tactics against German panzer brigades equipped with newly produced Panther tanks. The engagement at Aracourt differed from Bocage fighting in that longer engagement ranges were possible, but American tank destroyer crews still emphasized concealment and surprise over direct confrontation. M18 Hellcats positioned in hull-down positions behind ridge lines would wait for German armor to advance into predetermined killing zones before opening fire. The psychological effect on German crews remained consistent with earlier experiences in Normandy. The technical superiority of German armor became increasingly irrelevant as American tank destroyer crews perfected ambush techniques that negated German advantages in frontal armor protection and gun range. Tank destroyers, engaging from concealed positions at close range, could penetrate German armor, regardless of technical specifications, while German crews often had no opportunity to return effective fire before American vehicles withdrew to alternate positions. The cumulative effect of sustained ambush operations was evident in German after-action reports from the autumn of 1944. German armoured units reported decreasing effectiveness due to crews who were reluctant to advance aggressively through terrain that might conceal American tank destroyers. The psychological dominance that German armour had enjoyed earlier in the war was systematically eroded by American tactics that turned every advance into a potential ambush. Winter fighting in the Ardennes during December 1944 provided the ultimate test of American tank destroyer ambush doctrine against the largest German armoured offensive since the opening of the Normandy campaign. The Battle of the Bulge saw German forces commit their remaining armoured reserves in a desperate attempt to split Allied armies and recapture the initiative in Western Europe. Tank destroyer battalions defending the northern shoulder of the German penetration faced elements of the 6th SS Panzer Army, including newly equipped units with Tiger and Panther tanks. The snow-covered terrain of the Ardennes differed significantly from the Bocage of Normandy, but American crews adapted their ambush techniques to exploit the concealment provided by forests and the channeling effect of narrow mountain roads. The 773rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, defending approaches to Malmedy, demonstrated the versatility of ambush tactics under winter conditions. M18 crews concealed their vehicles in wooded positions overlooking road junctions, where German armour was forced to travel in column formation. The psychological lessons learned during months of Bocage fighting proved directly applicable to the different terrain and weather conditions of the Ardennes. Technical Sergeant Harold Baumgarten's crew destroyed 5 German tanks during the first 3 days of the German offensive by employing classic ambush techniques adapted to winter warfare. Baumgarten's after-action report emphasized the continued psychological effectiveness of surprise attacks against German armor, even when German crews were expecting American resistance. The German crews still react with panic when fired upon from concealed positions. Despite months of experience with our ambush tactics, they have not developed effective countermeasures. Their first instinct is still to withdraw rather than attempt to locate and suppress our positions. This psychological advantage has become as important as our technical capabilities. The conclusion of the Battle of the Bulge in January 1945 marked the end of significant German armoured operations in Western Europe. Tank destroyer ambush tactics had proven effective against every type of German armour under diverse terrain and weather conditions. More importantly, these tactics had fundamentally altered the psychological balance between American and German armored forces. German panzer crews, who had dominated European battlefields for 4 years, found themselves increasingly reluctant to advance through terrain where American tank destroyers might be concealed. This psychological transformation was as significant as any technical development in determining the outcome of armored warfare in Western Europe. The legacy of tank destroyer ambush tactics extended well beyond the immediate circumstances of the Normandy campaign. American armor doctrine developed during the Cold War incorporated lessons learned about the effectiveness of concealed positions and surprise attacks against numerically superior armored forces. The emphasis on mobility, firepower, and concealment that characterized successful tank destroyer operations became fundamental principles of American anti-tank doctrine. The M18 Hellcat itself proved to be one of the most successful American armored vehicles of World War II, with a kill-to-loss ratio that exceeded most other tank destroyers. This success resulted directly from the development of ambush tactics that exploited the vehicle's advantages in speed and concealment while negating its disadvantages in armor protection. The Hellcat became the standard against which post-war tank destroyers were measured. The psychological lessons of hedgerow ambush warfare proved equally enduring. American military planners recognized that properly trained crews using appropriate tactics could overcome significant disadvantages in equipment quality through superior positioning and employment techniques. This understanding influenced American military doctrine throughout the Cold War, emphasizing training and tactics over reliance on technical superiority alone. The German perspective on American tank destroyer ambush tactics, gathered from post-war interrogations and captured documents, revealed grudging professional respect and deep frustration. German armored officers recognized that American forces had developed systematic solutions to the tactical challenges of hedgerow warfare, creating doctrines that maximized American advantages while minimizing German strengths. Oberst Fritz Bayerlein, one of Germany's most experienced panzer commanders, wrote extensively in his post-war memoirs about the psychological impact of facing American tank destroyer ambushes. The knowledge that any advance might be met by devastating fire from invisible positions fundamentally altered the psychology of armored warfare. Crews who had previously felt secure behind their armor learned to fear every hedgerow, every tree line, every position that might conceal American tank destroyers. The technical analysis of American ambush tactics revealed sophisticated understanding of ballistics, armor protection, and crew psychology. German engineers studying knocked-out Panthers and Tigers found evidence of precise shot placement that indicated American crews possessed detailed knowledge of German armor vulnerabilities. The recognition that American tank destroyer crews had become highly skilled tank hunters was particularly troubling to German planners who had assumed technical superiority would compensate for other disadvantages. The strategic implications of tank destroyer ambush tactics extended to broader questions about the relationship between technology and tactics in modern warfare. The success of American crews using inferior equipment to defeat superior German armor through better tactics and positioning demonstrated that technological advantages could be negated by innovative tactical employment. This lesson proved particularly relevant for post-war American military planning, which assumed that future conflicts might involve facing numerically superior forces equipped with advanced weapons. The hedgerow fighting of 1944 provided a template for how smaller, better-trained forces could defeat larger, technically superior enemies through superior tactics and employment techniques. The individual stories of tank destroyer crews who mastered ambush warfare provide insight into the human factors that determined tactical success. Technical Sergeant Morrison returned to civilian life in Iowa, where he rarely spoke about his wartime experiences. In a late-life interview conducted by his grandson, Morrison reflected on the transformation from defensive fighter to aggressive hunter that characterized his experience in Normandy. "We learned that being outgunned did not mean being outfought. The Germans had better tanks, but we learned to fight smarter. We used the terrain, we used surprise, we used everything we could think of to turn the odds in our favor. By the end, we were not afraid of Panthers or Tigers. We knew we could kill them if we were patient and picked our shots carefully." The technological evolution of tank destroyer doctrine continued throughout the Cold War, with American forces developing increasingly sophisticated anti-tank weapons that incorporated lessons learned from World War II ambush operations. Wire-guided missiles, thermal imaging systems, and advanced ammunition types all reflected principles first demonstrated by M18 crews hiding in Norman hedgerows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The fundamental insight that concealment and surprise could overcome technical disadvantages became a cornerstone of American military doctrine. Special operations forces, light infantry units, and even conventional armor formations adopted modified versions of the ambush techniques first perfected by tank destroyer crews in the Bocage of Normandy. July 15, 1944, when Technical Sergeant Morrison first positioned his M18 Hellcat in a concealed hedgerow position near Villers-Bocage, marked the beginning of a tactical revolution that fundamentally altered the psychology of armored warfare. American tank destroyer crews learned to transform defensive weapons into offensive tools through innovative employment techniques that maximized their advantages while exploiting enemy weaknesses. The hedgerows of Normandy became classrooms where American crews learned lessons that would influence military doctrine for decades. The patient discipline required for successful ambush operations, the detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities and vulnerabilities, and the psychological understanding that fear could be as effective as firepower, all became enduring elements of American tactical thinking. The crews who perfected these techniques, men like Morrison, Rubino, and Baumgarten, demonstrated that individual initiative and tactical innovation could overcome seemingly insurmountable material disadvantages. Their legacy extends far beyond the immediate circumstances of World War II, providing timeless lessons about the relationship between technology, tactics, and human factors in determining military success. The transformation of American tank destroyer doctrine from mobile defense to aggressive ambush warfare represents one of the most significant tactical innovations of World War II. The success of these tactics against the most capable armored forces ever fielded validated the principle that intelligent employment of available resources could overcome apparent disadvantages in equipment, quality, or numerical strength. When the last German forces surrendered in May 1945, American tank destroyer crews had proven that patience, discipline, and tactical innovation could transform defensive weapons into decisive instruments of victory. The hedgerows of Normandy stand as monuments to their achievement, silent witnesses to the transformation of young American soldiers into master practitioners of the deadly art of armored ambush warfare. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.